Tristan Kumar's The Final Enigma, Volume 1, The Spread of Evil, narrated and written by Tristan Kumar. Act 2, The Broken Mirror, Part 6, Wanted, Dead or Alive. The neighborhood was quiet. The leaves in the trees slightly rustled with the soft breeze, but other than that, silence. The perfect night. The streetlights shone down brightly onto the sidewalk. Suddenly, my car drifted around the corner and slammed into the lamppost, making it fall and shatter into sparks. Behind me was a horde of other vehicles with massive weapons. It was the dead of night in a quiet neighborhood until we arrived. The people behind me were shooting me with anger. I continued to drive. I was in a bloody suit. I held my chest where I had been shot as I drifted around another corner. If only Mike hadn't betrayed me, we could have assassinated one of the biggest crime bosses in history. Let me explain. This very night, we were at a party with some very important people. Suddenly, the crime boss walked in, transforming him to be the elephant in the room, Sebastian Baranova. Michael signaled at me to lead him away, which I did. I was ready to take him out for the price on his lousy head. If you don't know, which you shouldn't, the lying pig stole his brother, Yuri Alexander Baranova's money without his consent. Sebastian took his brother's money illegally and restarted the largest drug business in history, and we were about to take him out. Betraying me, Mike walks into the room where I am watching Sebastian, pulls a gun, and shoots me in the side. Sebastian ran out, and the alarms went off. I jumped on top of the table and grabbed Mike by his collar. We busted through the door, which led to a balcony above the lively party, which was now startled by the gunshot and the alarms going off. He tried to shoot me in the face, but I grabbed his wrist and shoved it down. Then I kneed his hand and scampered to the ground to get the gun. Mike stood in shock as I shot him in the stomach. He fell back and landed with a splat on the floor below. I ran back inside the room where I came from and leaped down the stairs to my car. It was a sports car, not meant to be bulletproof. Some guards saw me and started to fire at me as I hopped in the car. They followed me with their weapons as I drove into the forest and into a nearby city. And now you know where I was as I clashed with the lamppost while being pursued by a bunch of Sebastian's men. I turned another corner and started toward the highway. The orange lights in the night seemed to provide a haze over the highway as I started up the ramp. I merged with the traffic of the highway as the other cars around me swerved away from the gunshots behind me. I leaned out of my broken window and shot back with my gun at the cars, but nothing hit them. I leaned back in before they could blow my head off and drove faster down the highway. I pressed the pedal to the metal as the trucks tried to drive around me and corner me. I barely survived passing many cars, but I couldn't lose them. They stayed right on my tail. I found an open spot and leaned out my window again. This time, I shot through the damaged window of one of the 3 trucks, and it drifted away from me and eventually crashed into the side of the highway, causing a big explosion. I leaned back in and drove past another truck. Suddenly, a truck drove right next to me. One of Sebastian's men opened the window and started to fire at me. I ducked down and stepped on the brake pedal. The truck stopped later on and had to quickly turn around. I looked through the broken back window of my car and saw the other truck driving toward me at full speed. I drifted around and narrowly sped past it on the wrong side of the road. The headlights of the cars blinded me, but I continued to drive. Eventually, we came to a bridge. The 2 sides of the highway separated from each other with a gap down to a river far below. So now, I was fighting a battle on the wrong side of the road. Suddenly, I saw another 2 trucks come from the other side. A man got on top of the truck and shot a rocket launcher at the bridge. I drifted back around as the bridge exploded and drove back. The other 2 trucks following me before didn't expect us and flew right off the bridge, taking care of that problem. I continued to drive faster as the 2 sides of the highway eventually merged. Now, the other 2 trucks were going in the wrong direction on the highway. I thought I would lose them, but they drove their heavily armored truck through the concrete border and continued to fire at me. I cursed loudly as I drove around another truck, realizing it would not be as easy as I thought to lose them. I saw another 2 trucks heading toward me in my direction. Now, I was cornered. I frantically thought of a way to get out of my situation and finally had a plan. I continued to drive my car. My engine was rumbling in the hood of my car as I drove faster and faster. When I was about to hit the other 2 trucks facing me, I drifted and drove toward the concrete border on the side of the highway and sped forward. The other 2 trucks didn't expect this and crashed into each other. My car flew onto the ground around 20 feet below the elevated highway as the collision explosion echoed around the forest. I landed and immediately pressed the brakes. I jerked around and quickly looked up at the fire raging on the highway. Still in pain from the gunshot, I nodded in approval of my work and drove to a city in my heavily damaged car. My name is Agent 39, a hitman, assassin, secret agent, or whatever people like to call my profession. I've been hired by secret contractors for the past years since 2025, and that day was my 27th birthday. I drove with my dirty arm out of the broken window as I entered the bright city of Leadville. The year was 2026, and it was early November, so I had only been doing this for around a year. I drove to a bar in the city and parked my car outside. Many drunkards smoking outside looked at my car, confused, but I didn't care. Before I got out, I took off my tight tie and set it on the ripped passenger seat. I also unbuttoned my jacket and let my body breathe. I got out of the car and limped toward the bar when I was ready. I prepared myself for whatever would come and walked inside. Many people were playing pool or talking as I walked in. I went to the bartender and took a seat. "What can I get for you?" the young female bartender asked. "I'll have a glass of water, thanks," I replied. She nodded at me and headed near some other men talking to each other. They looked over at me and focused on me, tired and injured. "Well, looky here, Greg. We got ourselves a criminal," one of the men said as they stood up and walked over to me. "You're right, Saul. He's wanted," Greg said as he bent down right next to me with crooked teeth. "Dead or alive." "Look, you got the wrong guy, pals," I said to them, but they leaned back and chuckled. "You got a big bounty on your head," Greg said as he leaned down to my ear. "Agent 39. Saul started to laugh like a drunkard behind him, and Greg started to laugh as well as he stood back upright. "Look, I don't know who you're talking about, so leave me alone, you chuckle nuts," I said. Seeming offended, Greg grabbed me by the shoulder and yelled at me, still drinking. I raised my hand for a refill to the bartender, and she came over to fill it. "Or what? You're gonna kill us?" Greg said. The bartender filled my glass, but Saul violently grabbed her by her collar. "Listen, sweetheart, don't serve this punk anymore," he said, as spit flew from his nasty teeth into her pretty face. "Well, that's the customer's choice, not yours," the bartender said, but Saul suddenly raised his hand and struck her across the face. She cried in pain and fell to the ground behind the counter. "I don't care what he said. When I say something, you listen, you dumb," Saul yelled at her, but I couldn't hear the rest, for my heartbeat filled my ears in anger. Greg chuckled again and grabbed my shoulder. Suddenly, I grabbed Greg's hand and slammed it on the table. He yelled in pain, causing Saul to turn to me. I punched him squarely in the nose. He cursed and fell back as everyone else in the bar stopped talking and watched. I grabbed my glass of water from the table and drank it all. The bartender watched in shock and confusion on the ground as I wiped the water off my mouth. I flipped the glass in my hand, turned around, and threw the glass at Saul's head. It shattered, and he fell back again. Without warning, Greg grabbed my back and prepared to slam my face on the table, but I quickly took off my jacket and spun around. I kicked him back to the ground, quickly grabbed my jacket, and turned to blind the weary Saul. Now blinded, I kicked him back to the ground, and he slid along the carpeted floor to the wall, blood streaming from his nose. He yelled in anger and charged at me. I prepared to attack him once more, but Greg grabbed my arms and held me in front of Saul. Saul ran up in anger and punched me in the chest. I winced at the pain, but immediately kicked Saul back and flipped into the arms of Greg to kick him back as well. Saul leaned against the wall, and I ran to knock him out. I ran toward him, and he threw a punch at me. I ducked under it and knocked him back. Suddenly, a knife flew from behind me and lodged itself into the wall. I turned around and saw a hooded figure holding 2 more knives. Without looking, he threw a knife at Greg and pinned his hand against the wall. He screamed in pain as I turned to him, ready to continue my fight. Part 7. The Vile Challenger. The man leapt toward me as I fell to the ground and rolled away. He struck his knife against the wood where I was and turned to me. He ripped it out of the wall and turned to me on the ground. I slid back on my dusty jacket and smiled as I helped him with my fists. The man leaped toward me and stomped on my foot. I held back the pain as I tried to punch him, but he moved aside. I stared in shock as he moved both knives toward me. He missed me and shoved his knife into the table. He leaned over his arm and shoved the other knife next to it. Out of options, he kicked me. I stumbled back and smiled, showing I was uninjured so far. He grunted in anger, spun over his arms whose knives were on the table, ripped out his forehand's knife, and flung it at me. It barely missed me and flew back to the other side. He tried to lift the other knife out of the table but failed to do so. He shoved it deeper into the table and turned the blade toward the table's long side. He dragged his knife through the wood quickly to me. He ripped out the knife when he reached me and swung at me violently. I ducked and immediately caught his arm, which swung back around to hit me again. He dropped his knife down to his other hand and jabbed it at me, but once again missed somehow. I reached down with one hand, held his stabbing arm, and kneed it. The knife fell to the floor, and we both stopped to look at it. We looked at each other, and I suddenly headbutted him, reached down, and grabbed the knife. I held it upside down to become more tactical as the just late killer stood back up and looked at me. Yeah, who has a knife now, huh? I mocked the man as we circled. Then he stopped and pulled out a small stick from his back. He held it upright and it extended into a long bow staff. I sighed. Suddenly, two small, sharp blades stuck out from either side of the staff. Man, come on. I was just joking, I said. Suddenly, he lunged at me, and I barely dodged it. I tried to stab him, but he spun past me. I stared at him as he went back and slid on the floor behind him. Just now, I noticed that everybody had left except the bartender, who was cornered in the bar area. The man leaped at me once more and jabbed his staff at me. He missed once more, so he swung it around at the height of my head. I dug down and punched him in the knee. He dropped down to the ground on one knee, and I punched him across the face. I raised the knife as I threatened to strike. Look, I don't want to kill you, so how about we start over? Well, hi, what's your name? I said, trying to be peaceful. The man tilted his head at me. I looked to my left and saw the small blade fly at me. I fell back onto the ground as he stood up once more. He gripped the staff tightly and detached them into two small separate pieces. I crawled back as he leaped into the air and prepared to strike down on me. The knives landed on either side of my head. He quickly lifted up one to impale me, but I lifted my legs and kneed him in the chest. He groaned in pain. I lifted my legs up to my chest and I kicked him up. He fell back as I stood up, uninjured, but very tired. I could still feel the gunshot in my side from Mike from what seemed like forever ago, although it had just been a few hours. I looked outside and saw red and blue lights flashing as the siren slowly became louder. We looked at each other, and he ran out with the two halves of the staff. He looked back at me, almost signaling me for him to come and follow him to continue our little game. I started to run out, but saw the bartender again, a small mark on her cheek. I looked around the bar quickly. It was a mess. I pulled out a fat stack of a bunch of $100 bills out of my pocket and didn't bother to count. I tossed it to her, still scared on the ground, and nodded shyly. Have a good night, I said. With that, I quickly ran outside into the chill of the night. I saw the cops' cars pull around the corner to the bar as I hopped in my car through the broken glass. I turned it on and drifted out of the parking spot and onto the empty road. I looked around for the man. Suddenly, I saw a motorcycle roar from the other side of the bar. It was the man. He jumped the curb and sped down the road. My engine roared as I sped after him. He pulled out a gun and started to fire at me through my broken front windshield. I ducked down but continued driving. Suddenly, he ran out of bullets. In this window of opportunity, I sped toward him quickly and smashed my car into his motorcycle. He flew off of it and rolled onto the ground as the different components of his motorcycle broke apart and fell apart from each other. I immediately stopped the car and opened the door and got out. I went to him, dazed and confused, on the ground. I picked him up by his collar and ripped off his bandana. It was a man with a lot of gray hair. He was getting old. He winced in pain as I looked at him. "Who are you?" I yelled at him. Chris, he said. I breathed heavily and slowly let him down. Chris, huh? All right, come with me, I said as I looked around. I finally spotted a hotel. We need to talk. I placed his weak hand around my neck and helped him to my car. I tried to open the passenger door, but my hands were full. I looked around to ensure that no one was watching and just threw him on the hood of my car. Besides, it was only a short ride, and he was already unconscious, basically. I rode into the parking lot with Chris on the hood of my car, barely staying on. The hotel was in a small outcropping of a forest with a small highway passing behind it. It had orange walls that looked almost adobe-like. The parking lot had scattered garbage on the ground with the street lights illuminating the area. I looked through the broken window past Chris's body and saw the glowing sign. It read with some letters unlit, "Plasma's Inn." I drove right up to the hotel and parked the car. I got out, locked it, and helped Chris over my shoulder. I carried him inside and looked around. I heard soft music playing from up the stairs. Gee, what kind of entrance to a place is this? I said as I made my way up the stairs with the body of a man. The old receptionist was chewing gum and reading something on the computer in front of her. "Hello there," I said as I startled her. "Jeez, you shouldn't give a woman my age a scare like that. It might kill her," the old lady said. Sorry, I need a room. This is my friend," I said as I looked at the unconscious man on my shoulder. Jeffrey. He's so tired from drinking all night and doing other things that he just decided to nap. Anyway, what room will we be in?" I said to the receptionist. "Give me a minute to find you a room, hun," she said as she put her glasses on and looked at the computer. I looked at the clock above her and saw that it was the 5th of November, almost 9 p.m. I thought it was later, but I guess not. Next to the clock, I saw a thin line of maybe a doorway. This one's occupied, this one's occupied, this one's reserved for the scientist couple when they get here, the old receptionist said, but she caught my attention with an interesting reservation. Wait, did you say scientist couple? I asked her. Why, yes, I've known them for a little while. They love to take their little kid here once they finish going on a long trip. Oh, I love that little boy. I hope he grows up to be some mighty warrior, she said. Okay, I said, passing it by. I remembered reading about the experiments of a science couple in Colorado in the Inventors Week magazine. They once had their kid conduct an experiment, and it turned out that he was actually pretty smart. Though this may not even be them after all. Good for them, I thought to myself. Ah, room 39 is yours, she said as she handed me a key. Let me know if you need anything, I chuckled. 39. What a coincidence. I took the key, nodded at her, and walked down the hallway. I entered the room and immediately set Chris down on the bed. I made sure that he was knocked out and sighed. Finally, I could rest. I got in the shower and took a lengthy bath as all the dirt and blood washed off of me. After that, I changed into comfortable pants and a nice hoodie from the closet where somebody probably left behind their clothes for some reason. I checked the time, and now it was almost 10 p.m. I headed for one last walk outside the room before I hit the sack, just to make sure the area was clear, part of my training. I went to the reception area and looked around. Suddenly, a door opened, and I heard someone with metal boots walk up the stairs. They turned and looked at me. I could tell that it was raining outside by the way the person was drenched. It was a teenage girl with a soft white shirt and black pants. She looked around in anger with a cut on her lip. Suddenly, she caught sight of me. "Who are you?" she said as she walked toward me angrily. I'm Jeffrey. You?" I lied to her. It doesn't matter. Could you get out of my way? I need to do something, and I don't need a guy named Jeffrey getting in my way, she said as she looked at me. I could almost see some evil deep in her eyes, but I'm not one to assume. I moved out of her way as she stomped down the hall. A couple of minutes later, I headed back to my room. Once I headed back, I heard soft footsteps outside my room. I looked out the peephole and saw another teenage boy with black hair, also in a white soft shirt and black pants. He looked at my door and continued walking. It seemed like they were searching for something, but I didn't mind it. I headed to my bed and got some well-deserved rest at last, still thinking about the two teenagers who walked in. It probably wasn't that important, right? Part 8. The Citadel on the Mountain. I woke up to the sun shining on my face. Chris was still sleeping on the bed, so I got up and looked around. I stepped outside and walked down the hallway. Suddenly, I walked past a broken door leading into a messy room. I quickly walked inside to investigate, but all I saw was a red stain on the bed. On the ground were many bloody footsteps as well. I went to the reception area and there was a white tarp over it. I peeked behind it and saw another red stain. What the hell happened here last night? I thought to myself. Finally, Chris woke up and I helped him up. We both sat on our separate soft beds and I watched him as he rubbed his eyes. Agent 39, he said, and I looked up, shocked. The world's pissed at you, buddy. Yeah, I can see why. I tried to assassinate one of the biggest crime bosses of our time, and the public says I'm the enemy, of course. You know, along with others, but nobody cares about that, right? I sighed. But Chris shook his head. My boy, you left too soon. Yes, you scared Sebastian away, but he ran out the backside of the hotel and fell down some stairs while screaming frantically. Let's just say that Sebastian's neck wasn't as flexible as everyone thought, so yes, good sir, you were successful, Chris said, finally providing something good to me in the past 24 hours. Oh, well, good to know. Anyway, why were you trying to kill me? I asked, getting to the point of our conversation. No, not were, Chris corrected me, but I shook my head in confusion. When did I say were? I asked. No. You said, why were you still hunting me? But you forgot that I still am hunting you, Chris said. Well, I have the power and control right now over you, but okay, I said. I don't really think so. Okay, shut up and let's talk, I said, as you smiled. Well, to be honest, I need you. And quickly, Chris said, finally getting serious. What for? I asked him, but he seemed to hesitate. Before I tell you, I need to make sure you're going to help me, so, he said as he held out his hand for me to shake. Are you in or are you out, Agent 39? On behalf of his part, this was a terrible question. In my personal expertise and opinion, Without providing me with any previous information on whatever this new mission was, I had to decide if I would go or not in the moment. I figured that if I didn't help him, then I would just be chased by some cops for the rest of my life, so I reluctantly agreed. All right, I'm in. Now, what are we going to be doing? I replied as he nodded. All right, so, long ago, in the middle of Berlin, 1942, a mysterious cosmic web opened, and a strange red liquid spilled onto the ground as the web vanished. So we've been told, the liquid solidified into a red shard from the mud and the rain. The Nazis seized control of the powerful relic, of course, but with the news of their leader's death, a soldier quickly stole it, and it flowed like a river into the darkest depths of the black market. Many years later, a man known only as Patient Zero bought it in some gruesome and violent ways, and used it against some sort of monster on Halloween in 1964. In the Alton Manor, outside of Las Vegas. Eventually, it was lost after a quarrel with the monster, and the shard was thrown into the sewer system and lost. But no one knows if Patient Zero lived from the wrath of the monster. Eventually, someone found the red shard and presented it to NASA in 1967, where they bought it from the mystery seller and gave it to the first astronauts to test in space safely away from other people. In July of 1969, the astronauts went to the moon and investigated the shard while they were there. Suddenly, one of them idiotically dropped it, and it flew into the darkness of space, being propelled off somewhere randomly, supposedly never to be seen again, until now. A couple of days ago, we got news of a cosmic beacon deep in space on a planet called Gitania in the Tal Bonlock system. Many people want its enriched power, and many want it destroyed, but it is said to be lying on an altar in an intergalactic citadel of sorts, but something is said to guard it, and we're not sure what it is. And that's where you come in, Agent 39. I saw you and your skills one day, and knew that you and I could help each other to share the power of the crystal for the future. Especially after your mission with last night, you seem to be freely booked for the next couple of days, so how would you like a trip to Tal Bonlocks? Chris finished at last. I was utterly blown away by this information. Though, not really. The entire reason people went to the moon was to test the effects of a red crystal from World War II without people getting hurt? Humans are that smart? I knew it was an extraordinary power, but I felt there had to be some mysterious trick behind it. But I wasn't sure what it was. All right, I agreed. When do we leave? How about right now, Chris said, as he stood up and walked outside the inn. I saw a family helping their child into a car on the way out. The child seemed to be confused and shocked. The father looked around, and he looked at me. He had similar features to the boy I had seen outside of my room last night. He nodded at me, and I nodded back in friendliness. They got in the car and drove down the road back to their regular lives. I had a hunch about who they were, but I couldn't tell. As long as they all lived through ripe old age, I wouldn't mind them. Anyway, once they left and once no one was around, Chris pressed a button and a ship came flying from over the inn. I gasped in amazement. A ladder dropped down to us and he climbed up to the ship. The ship was decorated with spray paint, almost like it was meant for a kid. But why would a kid be alone in space? I didn't mind it as usual and climbed onto the ladder as Chris began to fly up. I looked over Earth as we flew away, somehow feeling that I wouldn't be returning there for a while. Something felt very wrong, but hopefully it was just a hunch. I climbed into the ship and Chris closed the door as we entered space. I went to the cockpit and admired the view of space. As a kid, I had always liked space. Yeah, I know, a hitman with the name as a noun followed by a number doesn't seem like the type to like space, but I did. Chris stood up and turned on autopilot. I moved out of the way as we moved to the empty body of the ship. He grabbed a duffel bag hanging on the wall, unzipped it, and threw it to the ground. Inside were ice picks and winter climbing gear. To get to the Citadel, we need to climb an icy cliff, the only way up. We need to hurry, though. I heard that there are other parties desperate for the power that we need to watch out for, Chris said as I crouched down and investigated the gear. I nodded at him in understanding. I sat down against the door and got some rest. I awoke to Chris shaking me. We weren't moving anymore. We're here. Are you ready? He asked. Yeah, let's do this, I said, feeling confident to find this lost treasure. I put on a heavy winter coat from the bag and wore an oxygen mask over my mouth. You don't need it all the time. We can technically breathe the air of Gitania, it's not that good for us, so we use this purer form. Once we get to the Citadel, you can take it off, Chris explained. I nodded and let it hang around my neck for now. I grabbed 2 ice picks once Chris did, and he pulled a lever to open the door. The door opened to a large planet. The planet was blue and enriched with life. Don't be fooled, because those are just clouds. Below the surface, it may be beautiful, but there are many vile creatures, I've been told. You don't want to get stuck down there, Chris warned. Oh, I said, hiding my face from how dumb I seemed next to Chris, the genius. He jumped off the flying ship and slowly floated down to the ground due to the low gravity. He landed on the moon-like surface below, and a cloud of dust arose around him. He started to jump along the moonscape to the Citadel. I jumped off and followed him along the desolate plateau. As we approached the Citadel, I noticed that it was on a high mountain with a frozen waterfall coming from the base of it at the cliff's edge where we would climb. I'm not sure why people called it a citadel because it was basically just a large tower. At the top, there was a small, faint red light, the treasure lost long ago. We finally reached the base of the waterfall and found a place where we could hike no longer, so we would have to climb. Chris hit one of his ice picks hard against the ice and made a good grip. He did the same with his other pick and began to climb. I followed him up the icy waterfall. The wind blew gently on us as we looked across the gray plateau where we just were. The ship had landed now and was waiting for us to return with the treasure. Behind it were other dark mountains implanted onto the dusty ground. I looked up and saw the tower of the Citadel loom ominously above me at the top of the waterfall, becoming much bigger than it looked down below, of course. We eventually reached the top curve of the waterfall, and Chris got up before me to help me up. I nodded at him as I got onto stable ground. I took a deep breath into my oxygen mask and looked around. Great view, huh? Chris asked me. Yeah, just wait until you look behind you. It gets better, I said, staring at the Citadel. He slowly turned around and softly gasped. The cold wind blew around the tall tower of the Citadel. It was covered in dark stone brick and lined the entire tower. We walked to the front door and opened it. The creak from the door echoed through the tower as the wind quickly filled the building. We both walked in and closed the door. We also both noticed the staircase spiraling toward the top of the tower. At the top was a small but powerful red light, the final remnants of the most powerful energy in the universe. Are you ready? Chris asked me, but I looked closely and could almost see my reflection in a mirror at the top of the tower. Somehow I felt a strong connection to this mirror. Right, let's do this, I replied, filling myself with confidence. Part 9. The Mirror of Fate. I slowly walked to the base of the stairs and began to walk up the long stairway. I felt that with every step I took, I was slowly weighted down, almost like I wasn't supposed to be there. Chris followed behind me slowly as we reached the top. I looked around for the altar the moment we got to the top to find it and get out of there before other troublesome parties found us, but something was wrong. I can't find the altar, I said after meeting back near the stairs with Chris. Neither can I. What are we missing? It should be right here, he said, starting to get upset. It should be there, shouldn't it? Yes, that's where I remember it being a long time ago when I was someone different, a mysterious, high-pitched male voice said. We looked around the room, but there was no one. Wondering what I am. Yes, wondering who I am. Interesting. If only they knew what the power did to me, the voice eerily said as it echoed through the tower. Where are you? Chris said, but I was thinking that I didn't want to find out who was talking. Corruption is the only thing you will find from this mystery power. Yes, of course I know that, but all I want to do is to save you two. If you deny my request, the only thing you will find is the shards of corruption, the voice said again. Where are you? Chris said. Chris, I think we should get out of, I started to say, but stopped as I saw a small creature in the dark corner of the tower behind Chris. What are you looking at? What's wrong? Chris said to me. One is wise, one is reckless. One will get themselves killed, the other will live with guilt. One was born to fight, one was born to die. One will save us all, one will break us all. I see it all right here and now, and I know who must live, the creature in the corner said. Chris, we need to get out of here, I yelled at him. And I know who must die, the creature said as it jumped from the corner and kicked Chris. He fell to the stairway and started to fall past the stairs. He hit the ground with a loud thump and stayed still. You little monster, I yelled at him, and I tackled him and threw him to the side. I looked down at Chris and got ready to go and help him. You are the one who was born to fight. You are the one who must live. He was meant to deceive and betray you," the creature yelled at me before I descended the stairs. What are you saying?" I asked. Look, the creature said as it hid in the shadows like a child as it pulled a red crystal from behind its back. I stared at it in awe. The crystal was just as I had imagined it to be when Chris told me its history. There was a thick layer of debris and dust on it from the years that it had endured on Earth, but the solid red glow shined and made the shard glow brightly. I reached for it immediately, but the creature pulled the crystal back to its small chest. Mine! Mine! It yelled. It crawled on the ground and went back to its dark corner. I am trying to save you from misery, so why do you still strive to take this from me? The creature asked. Listen, just give it to me and you won't get hurt, I said, slowly reaching for it. Tell me, the creature said. No, give it, I yelled at the creature, but it snarled and asked again. Tell me, the creature yelled at me. No, give it, I yelled, and I jumped to it, but it just crawled to another corner. Tell me why, the creature yelled, specks of spit flying down onto my sweaty face. I need to prove myself, I yelled, finally telling the truth. See? Wasn't so hard, was it? The creature said as it saw it smile in the dim light of a sun behind the neighboring blue planets. Now, tell me more. The creature looked at me with evil eyes in the darkness. I still couldn't even see what it fully looked like. All my life, I've been treated like a killer, a slave, a subject. I want to prove them wrong. I want to give back to what was lost many years ago to them so they will treat me like a human, I yelled at the creature, tears starting to swell in my eyes. Surprisingly, I wasn't lying to it. Everything I told the creature was true. The creature softly chuckled at me before it began, and I looked at it in confusion and anger. I was once like you, mistreated and undeserved. I softened my face. Many years ago, so I was forced off my homeworld to prove myself and find it. I found it, but my ship was broken, so I had to repair it. The next year, I tried to repair it, but the more I held onto the crystal, the more I was damaged, and the more I was corrupted. It brought me evil, but I still couldn't seem to set it down. It was so nice and warm inside. The vile monster inside of it only wishes to bring doom to its user. I did not want this. I did not expect this, but now look at me, the creature said as it began to laugh crazily in the corner. I stared at it in utter confusion as it laughed louder and louder. No, it seems to want me now. I was forgotten, wiped off the face of reality, an insult, a failure. I ruined my life, and you will do the same. Don't change fate. It won't like what you do, the creature said, and with that, it started to cry in the corner. I knew I still had to get that crystal some way, somehow, but I thought about the consequences of doing so. Was it really worth my soul and sanity to take it? I paced around the top of the tower, thinking about the decision while the creature wept in the corner. As I was walking in circles, pondering my decision, a glare of light suddenly blinded me. After I regained my sight, I saw light from Gitania's sun shine on me in the mirror. It was in another room on the top of the tower, which I thought wasn't there before. I looked back at the creature in the corner, and it was still crying. I walked into the next room and seemed to cross the threshold of reality by doing so, for the mirror was far from what I expected. I stepped forward toward the mirror curiously and looked at it. Of course, I saw myself in its dirty reflection. There were edges on the edge of the mirror which lined the entire frame. I looked in the mirror even more closely, and then the unimaginable happened. I wish I had never looked into that mirror, because I would explain what I saw, but I'm not sure what it was. Basically, it's indescribable, incomprehensible, and beyond the limits of what was real to me. It won't be an accurate description of what I saw, but I can at least try my best. Alright, so I looked in the mirror and was suddenly sucked through it. Stay with me. I was now in a dark void. Suddenly, something that looked like a cosmic butterfly flew to me. It landed on my finger, and I felt the presence of the universe, time, and everything that has ever existed was really on my finger in that weird butterfly. Then it flew away from me. I followed it and eventually saw a doorway, standing eerily in empty space. I went to it and opened it. Suddenly, I was back on the ground in Gitania but away from the Citadel. Speaking about the Citadel, it had fallen. Yes, the tower had fallen onto the ground. All around me, different types of aliens fought in an all-out war. Suddenly, I saw the red light across the battlefield. It was in my pocket, and I held something else in my arms while running from the other aliens who tried to attack me, with Chris running behind me. He was going to betray me. Suddenly, I climbed on a strange structure on the edge of the world on the horizon, about to fall to the blue planet behind me. I tried to climb back up, but in doing so, I accidentally broke the crystal in half. Everyone watched as a strange liquid floated above the ruins of the crystal, leaving the crystal clear and dead. The liquid flew into the air, but the wind from the planet somehow blew it out farther into space. Suddenly, I was lifted off the ground away from my other self on the brink of death, seemingly invisible to anything on the planet, and followed the liquid and watched as it lowered down onto another planet. Suddenly, it crashed into a warehouse. I could see on the horizon was the city of Las Vegas. Suddenly, I saw an old man in a white formal tuxedo scoop it up into a small cup and smile sinisterly. It was Chris, but he seemed more damaged and bruised and old. It seemed that it had taken a couple of years to reach Earth. He said something about taking revenge on someone named Xander, and he sucked the liquid into a syringe and injected it into a red cube. He smiled and laughed. Suddenly, the night sky became day, then night, then day, then night, then day, then night, as it continued. The days passed, and I watched as the cube was distributed and sold all over the world. It was spreading. Suddenly, I flew to Colorado in another warehouse. A young man opened the box and called out to his other colleagues. I heard them say something about the boss wanting to get the attention of someone. They grabbed a briefcase and some wires and invented something that I couldn't really tell. A couple of days later, the men drove in a truck to a school. They shot up the school, planted the bomb, and it exploded, killing many kids. I saw the sun turn red and gasped. Suddenly, I flew to a mountain, and instead of crashing into the side of it, I entered Colorado's mountain base, NORAD. I flew through it invisibly and went to an office. On the table was a nameplate that read, "The 49th President of the United States." I read the real name of the president and gasped, finally realizing that Chris's plan was to get some attention by mass distributing an unstable energy source and using it to conduct terrorist attacks, and finally get the attention of the man of mystery all along, the President of the United States, Xander Jones, brother of Chris Jones. Part 10. The Shard and the Crystal. I gasped, finally putting together the pieces. I started to walk backward, which ended up in me walking out of the mirror's illusion. I hyperventilated, and my heart almost beat out of my chest. I could feel I was being lied to. I should have never trusted some idiot in a bar who tried to kill me. Suddenly, I felt a small hand on my leg. I shouted and turned around. I could barely see the creature with the tint of red in their eyes before I went back into the darkness. What was that? I yelled in confusion as I looked back into the mirror, scared. The mirror eerily reflected me, but I didn't even know if seeing myself was a good sign anymore. "That is the future," the creature said, and I finally realized it. I could never let everything about to happen occur, or else I would cause the end of Earth. All eyes were on me making this decision. "How can I prevent this? I don't want this!" I yelled in desperation as I heard Chris start to wake up at the bottom of the stairwell. "You can't! I am sorry, but there is no way to prevent what terror you saw. I saw the same long ago, and it came true," the creature exclaimed. Suddenly, I heard a large explosion from the planet outside the Citadel. I looked at the creature in the shadows, and it almost seemed like the only one I could trust was the creature. "All right, I'm Agent 39. What's your name?" I asked as I heard another explosion outside. "My name, it's, the creature said, trying to remember. "Hurry, please," I yelled as I heard another explosion outside and someone start to walk up the stairwell. "Godrian! Yes, that is what I was called long ago. Godrian," the creature exclaimed. "All right, Godrian, when everything starts to fall apart and become chaotic, follow me through the battlefield. We need to try to get this crystal off the planet without it breaking," I said as I saw the faint red light behind Godrian's back. He nodded quickly, excited but very scared. I heard another footstep up the stairs and shushed Godrian. The tip of a long gun slowly rose from the floor where the stairwell was. I snuck out of the room with a mirror and went near the altar. Suddenly, Chris snuck on top of the tower with a large automatic gun. I jumped forward behind him and grabbed the barrel. He started to fire, and the bullets scattered across the room. Godrian ducked from the bullets in the corner as we spun in the room together. Suddenly, Chris lifted me over his head and slammed me down onto the ground. He pointed the gun at me and fired, but I rolled out of the way right before he could shoot me and onto the stairs below. He looked down at me and aimed his gun at me. "I'm sorry, Agent, but you should have killed me when you had the chance," Chris villainously said as he squeezed the trigger. I closed my eyes, but I suddenly heard Godrian jump onto Chris and attack him. Both of them screamed in anger and confusion. He let down his aim and backed up, giving me enough time to climb back up to the top of the tower. I saw Chris dragging the helpless Godrian through the light. His body was bare and his bones were showing through his skin. His hands were glowing red from all the years of corruption from the crystal's wrath. Chris slammed Godrian against the wall as another explosion rocked the sky outside. What was going on? I had almost forgotten about the conflict outside as soon as I left to fight Chris, but it was still going on, so we had to hurry. Godrian put his hands up to cover his face in despair as Chris started to punch the helpless creature. He screamed and squealed. I ran to him, but he turned around and shot me with a handgun in the shoulder. I cursed and watched from the ground as Godrian was beaten violently. Through his grimy fingers, he looked at me, and his blood started to fill his face, and tears started to fill his eyes. All his life, he was a misfit. He was corrupted, but he believed there was good inside of him. But sadly, he could never prove it to his world, for anybody, for he would die there, if I didn't stop him. I ran toward Chris in pain and tackled him. The mirror fell over and shattered onto the ground. Chris, Godrian, and I all looked in shock as the tower began to rumble. "What did you do?" Godrian yelled at Chris. "Oh no, you have made a mistake." Chris and I stared at Godrian in confusion. But suddenly, the tower began to fall over. We all slid to the edge of the room in the mirror as we fell. Before the tower completely fell, I bent down and grabbed a large shard of the glass to continue to make sure that whatever danger Godrian warned us about would briefly change and be solved. I could see the future now, but only the very end. The tower fell to the ground and crashed, causing large clouds of smoke to enter the room. Eventually, we all broke out of the small room and landed on the dusty moonscape. Suddenly, a large green beam shot past us. We watched as it hit an alien. This was amazing, yet so horrifying to me. Purple blood spewed from its body onto the gray ground below, discoloring it gruesomely. We looked around. All around us, a full-out war of all races of aliens across the universe from all sides of it was occurring. Suddenly, Chris kicked me into the back. I completely forgot about him. I fell slowly to the ground due to the gravity, but Godrian immediately helped me up, and we started to run to Chris's ship as he started to shoot the aliens around him, attacking him. We ran through the battlefield, trying to get to Chris's luckily unharmed ship to prevent the dark future from happening. A large alien vehicle drove over us on a makeshift ramp, and aliens on top shot other aliens on around, squashing them and spilling their brains and blood all over the ground. I slid under a large tilted alien car, and Godrian climbed over it. I looked over at Godrian and still saw him holding the red crystal. "Godrian, I know it may seem like a bad time, but you gotta give it to me," I yelled over the chaos at Godrian as we continued running across the gray desert, dust flying behind us as we ran. "Why? Are you planning to prevent the dark future that you saw in the mirror?" Godrian asked me. I paused and looked down at my hand and stared into the glass shard from the mirror. The future was still the same, but I wanted to keep on fighting until it changed. "I know it's impossible, but yeah, that's my ideal plan," I yelled at him as we ran past a fistfight between some different kinds of aliens. "I know what you are getting at, but if you truly believe that you can solve it, I believe in you, Agent 39, Godrian hopes for me." I nodded at him. Suddenly, I ran into a large alien. The alien turned around and started shouting at me in its own language. I wiped the alien's spit off my face and raised its gun at me. I jumped up and grabbed its gun. Suddenly, Godrian jumped from the side of us and punched it. It fell back and I stomped on its face. Its head crushed into itself. Godrian jumped at me, so I grabbed him by the arms and threw him at an approaching alien. Godrian planted his feet on the alien's face and kicked it back again. Then I grabbed its heavy body and threw it over my head to Godrian. Godrian kicked it back to me like it was a game of sorts. Then I threw it into the air as it pulled out its other gun and prepared to fire at us, but a truck suddenly hit it and it was shredded to pieces above us. Its blood fell onto us as we smiled and nodded in approval. Suddenly, I heard a loud gunshot from a gun that was made on Earth. Godrian held his chest and blood started to come out of it. Behind him was Chris with a gun. He threw it to the ground as I ran to catch Godrian as he fell. I took the crystal from behind him and investigated his wound. He wouldn't survive if I didn't do something right then. "I wish it didn't have to come to this, Agent 39. We could have had it all. if you would have just listened to me. But hey, I'm feeling generous, Chris said as he sinisterly smiled. Hand over the crystal, leave the damn creature, and we can go and share this power together. You can change the future, Chris said. The moment he said that, I looked at the shard in the mirror. It still showed the same dark future as before, but was also beginning to switch back and forth between a universe where everything was good and no one had to die. Then I looked down at the bleeding Godrian in my arms. I knew what I had to do, which I wished that I didn't do. I stuffed the crystal and shard into my pocket, adjusted my hold on Godrian's body, and quickly sprinted away from Chris to the blue planet. Dangerously, he followed while shooting at me. We were running even closer to the blue planet when I suddenly slipped and fell onto the rocky edge before I fell down away from the fight. I grabbed onto Godrian with one hand and held on to the other side of the rock with my other. Suddenly, I heard the rest crystal begin to bend and become unstable in my pocket. It was about to break, and the future would be the same. I recognized that this was the moment I had to change. This very moment! I looked up at Chris as he looked down at me and pointed his gun directly at my forehead. I'll see you in hell, kid, Chris said as he pulled the trigger. Somehow, I moved out of the way right in time. He cursed as he tried to fire again, but had to reload. I pulled myself up a bit closer and grabbed Chris's ankle. His eyes widened as he looked down in shock. Oh no, you son of a, Chris started to say, but I slid on my oxygen mask with my chin, planted my feet near my hand, and pulled Chris off with me toward the next planet. Both Chris and I started to scream, but I finally realized that the pressure had let off the crystal and that the future was changed. For now. At least now no one would die in my eyes. We flew to the next planet, progressively getting faster as we flew. Eventually, we entered its atmosphere with some clouds, almost like Earth, with much more water and healthier, although there was supposed to be some very vile creatures, as Chris said. Eventually, we saw the lush green forest below us. I looked around frantically for a place to land, but somehow on a planet where there was more water than land, I couldn't find a place to land. I watched as Chris also looked around frantically. My mask slipped off and I realized that I couldn't breathe at all without the mask on this planet, adding another challenge to the situation. Eventually, we were all several feet away from the top of the forest. I screamed as I quickly slid back on my oxygen mask and held it tight as I landed on the large tree and started to slide down along the leaves. At least it slowed me down immensely. I got many scars and started to bleed as I fell down, but I made sure to keep Godrian safe with me. Eventually, we saw the grassy ground, but I was over a rock. At the last second, I threw Godrian to the soft grass beside me, but my arm made direct piercing contact with the rock. I felt something break in my elbow. Then, I passed out. After what seemed like many hours, I was shaken awake by Godrian. He had managed to take a piece of my clothing and bandage himself and my arm, which I was fine with. I looked at my arm and tried to move it. It did move, but just barely. We made it to a new planet, Godrian said, as I painstakingly stood up and looked up. Above us, through the gap of the trees where we had landed, was the moon of Gitania. I could still see the dust come off of it as the many alien blasts fired at others to claim the crystal, which was now in my hands. We did it. I looked at it and smiled. Then I looked at the shard of glass, and it showed the good future only. We had done it. We had changed the future to a better one. I smiled. Now, there would be no terrorist attack to end the earth, but instead, we would prosper and thrive in life. I looked at Godrian, but he looked sad and upset. What's wrong? We changed the future, I said happily, but he shook his head. You are wrong, Agent 39. The aliens would not stop looking for the crystal now that they know it was stolen, and they will search here and everywhere and all over the universe, which includes that they are coming for your planet, Godrian informed me dauntingly. Earth. Well, that's fine. As long as we can make it back in time, we can stop that. With the forced help of Chris, we can easily escape, right? I asked, but Godrian shook his head again. I'm afraid that when you change the future, you change it a bit too much, Godrian said as he looked up. Above us was the body of Chris, impaled on a tree branch. As his blood eerily leaked down onto the ground, I realized that we had changed it too much, and now I had done nothing. With Chris gone, who knew what would happen now? How would we get home? Suddenly, I felt a piercing pain inside of me. Strangely, I saw a weird red glow through my vision. Without warning, a large splintering pain shot through my body. Suddenly, a large web formed between me and Godrian. No, don't! Godrian yelled at me, but it was too late. From the pain, I stumbled into the web and was transported to another mysterious place. Godrian looked around for me. Agent? Agent? Godrian yelled on the lowly planet. Don't leave me here, Godrian said as he fell to the ground and started to cry. I fell through the web and eventually landed in a strange cell lined with gold and white lights. I could hear some strange noises and songs, but I couldn't tell. It sounded strange and demonic, adding a mysterious tone to the environment. I looked outside and saw a man standing in front of me. He walked into the lights and looked at me. My, Agent 39, you really changed the future pretty terribly, he said in the shadows. Who are you? Where am I? Where's Godrian? I yelled through the bars. Oh, did you not hear? Have you not heard? The man said, and I listened. My friend, it's been 20 years since you stole the red crystal, and Godrian is still there. I gasped, but before I could comprehend what was happening, the man walked into the light. He had brown skin, long, silky black hair that was tied into a messy man bun, and was wearing a very nice tuxedo. He looked through the bars at me and smiled. Suddenly, his eyes turned red, and large gooey appendages appeared behind his back like he was possessed by a monster. All because of you, I was transformed into a monster. I was tested on, beaten on, just because you changed something, the man yelled, but he calmed himself as his red tentacles went behind his back again, and he sighed. Who are you, and where am I? I said as I clenched my fists. The man chuckled outside of the bars, letting his laugh echo through the large building wherever we were. The eerie song and atmosphere started to slow down to add suspense. Before he could answer, I thought of the last time I saw Godrian, which was only a couple seconds ago, which was now 20 years ago. I could almost see the poor creature on the ground, crying for me when he shouldn't be. Well, this is the new and improved prison of the survivors, the man said cheerily, and I gasped, finally realizing who this was. And I'm their leader. My partner is Sylvie, owner of Multilabs, and my other partner is Jamal, owner of the up-and-running Spark program, and the ruler of the multiverse is yours truly, as I like to joke. But you, my friend, you can call me Rye. This episode was recorded by Tristan Kumar. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to check out the next act, which is going to be Act 3. The Reign of Blood. And yes, Rye has returned. But what the hell is going on with him? Anyway, I won't spoil it. Thank you so much for listening, and see you next time.